Most people live their entire lives not knowing that every single thing happening to them right now, every circumstance, every relationship, every dollar in their bank account, is the exact mathematical result of thoughts they planted weeks, months, or years ago. And James Allen discovered in 1903 that mental cause and effect operates with the same precision as physical cause and effect. Meaning, you can't plant apple seeds and get oranges, you can't plant thoughts of poverty and get wealth, you can't plant thoughts of fear and get courage. Yet somehow we expect our chaotic, uncontrolled thinking to produce organized, successful lives. The law of mental cause and effect is ruthlessly fair. It doesn't care about your intentions, your wishes, your prayers, or your desperation. It only responds to the actual mental seeds you plant through consistent thought patterns, and the moment you understand this law, you'll realize you've been accidentally creating most of your problems while wondering why the universe is against you. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to effortlessly attract success, while others with the same education, same opportunities, same starting point struggle their entire lives? And you probably thought it was luck, connections, or talent. But Allen proved it's none of those things. It's simply that successful people, unknowingly or knowingly, work with the law of mental cause and effect, while unsuccessful people unknowingly work against it, violating it thousands of times per day, and then blaming external circumstances for their internal causation. Allen documented case after case of people who transformed their lives not by changing their circumstances, but by changing their habitual thoughts. And here's the part that's going to blow your mind. He found that most people have it completely backwards. They think I'll change my thoughts when my circumstances improve, when actually the law works in reverse. Change your thoughts consistently for 30 to 90 days, and your circumstances must change, because they're the effect, and thoughts are the cause. I tested this myself 3 years ago when I was broke, bitter, and blaming everyone else for my failures. I spent every day thinking thoughts of resentment about my job, fear about money, anger at successful people, and I genuinely believed I was a victim of bad luck, bad economy, bad timing, until I read As a Man Thinketh, and one sentence hit me like a truck. Man is made or unmade by himself. In the armory of thought he forges the weapons by which he destroys himself, or he fashions the tools with which he builds for himself heavenly mansions of joy and strength and peace. I realized I'd been forging weapons of self-destruction for years, spending 8 hours a day thinking thoughts that were creating the exact life I hated. So I started an experiment. For 90 days, I would consciously plant only thoughts aligned with the life I wanted, thoughts of gratitude for my current job, even though I hated it, thoughts of abundance even though I was broke, thoughts of capability even though I felt like a failure. And I tracked my external circumstances daily to see if the law of mental cause and effect was real, or just philosophical poetry. The first 30 days, nothing visible changed externally, and I almost quit, thinking this is just positive thinking garbage that doesn't work in the real world. But Allen warned about this exact moment. He said, effects lag behind causes in the mental realm just like in the physical realm. When a farmer plants corn, he doesn't see corn the next day. He sees dirt. He sees nothing. But underground the seed is germinating, roots are forming, and if he digs it up to check, he kills it. Same with thoughts. The gestation period for mental seeds to manifest as physical circumstances varies based on the size and complexity of what you're creating. By day 47, something shifted. I got an unexpected opportunity at work I'd never noticed before. By day 62, my income increased for the first time in 2 years. By day 90, I'd been promoted, met new people who opened doors, and started a side business that eventually replaced my job. And here's what shocked me most. When I looked back at my journal, I could trace every single external change back to a specific internal shift in my habitual thinking 30 to 60 days prior. The law of mental cause and effect was mathematically precise, ruthlessly fair, and completely impersonal. It worked for me the moment I worked with it instead of against it. But wait, if this law is so precise and predictable, why do most people never discover it? Why do we go through life thinking we're victims of circumstances when we're actually creators of circumstances? And that's where it gets really interesting, because Alan revealed something most people never consider. The reason most people never discover the law of mental cause and effect isn't because it's hidden or secret. It's because the time delay between mental cause and physical effect creates the illusion that they're unrelated. And our brains are wired to connect things that happen close together in time, while missing connections separated by weeks or months. When you plant a thought of fear about money on Monday and you're still broke on Wednesday, your brain doesn't connect them. You think the thought didn't matter. But that thought is already working underground in your subconscious, attracting circumstances, influencing decisions, shaping your energy and behavior in ways you can't consciously perceive. And 6 weeks later, when you lose a client or miss an opportunity, you blame bad luck instead of recognizing it as the harvest of fear seeds you planted 42 days ago. Alan said this is why circumstances seem random and chaotic to most people. They're only looking at effects while being completely unconscious of the causes they planted. It's like a farmer who plants 50 different random seeds, forgets what he planted where, then acts surprised when his garden is chaos. Nothing makes sense because he never tracked cause and effect. The law doesn't stop working just because you're ignorant of it. Gravity doesn't pause when you don't believe in it. You can jump off a building thinking positive thoughts, and you'll still hit the ground. Mental laws are just as fixed and unchangeable as physical laws. The only difference is mental laws operate in the invisible realm of thought and consciousness. So most people never learn to work with them intelligently. Here's a perfect example that's going to make this crystal clear. Imagine two people. Both want financial abundance. Person A thinks about money with excitement and possibility for 5 minutes during morning meditation, then spends the remaining 23 hours and 55 minutes per day thinking thoughts of lack, worry, resentment at bills, fear of not having enough, comparison with others who have more, jealousy, scarcity, and stress. Person A has planted one abundance seed and 400 scarcity seeds that day. What will grow in their garden? Obviously, scarcity will dominate because that's what they watered most. Person B thinks about money with calm certainty during meditation, then, throughout the day, maintains thoughts of gratitude for what they have. Trust that more is coming, capability to earn and create value, abundance already present in their life, appreciation for others' success, generosity even when they don't have much. Person B is planting and watering abundance seeds all day long, hundreds of times. So abundance must grow because that's the dominant mental crop they're cultivating. Most people are Person A. They do 5 minutes of positive thinking and 23 hours of negative thinking, then wonder why positive thinking doesn't work. Alan would say, you're not failing at manifestation. You're succeeding at manifesting exactly what you're predominantly thinking. The law is working perfectly. You just don't like the results because you don't like your habitual thoughts. I tracked my own thoughts for 7 days straight using a counter app. Every time I had a thought about money, I categorized it as abundance, neutral, or scarcity. And the results horrified me. I was having roughly 80 money thoughts per day, and 72 of them were scarcity-based. Thoughts like, I can't afford this, that's too expensive, I'll never have enough, rich people are greedy, money is hard to get, the economy is bad, my industry is struggling, I deserve more than I'm getting, I'm being underpaid, this is unfair. And only 8 thoughts per day were abundance-based, usually during my morning visualization. which means I was planting scarcity seeds at a 9-to-1 ratio compared to abundance seeds. Then I was confused why my financial reality reflected scarcity. The moment I saw this data, I understood what Alan meant by man is made or unmade by himself. I was unmaking my financial success 72 times per day and making it 8 times per day, then blaming the economy, my boss, my circumstances, my bad luck, when the real culprit was my uncontrolled habitual thinking. My mental garden was 90% weeds and 10% flowers, and I was watering the weeds far more than the flowers. I started a new experiment, flipped the ratio. What if I could get to 72 abundance thoughts and 8 scarcity thoughts per day? What would happen to my external financial reality in 90 days? And the transformation was so dramatic, it scared me because I realized I'd been my own worst enemy for years, unconsciously sabotaging myself while consciously wishing for success, violating the law of mental cause and effect thousands of times, then wondering why my life reflected those violations. But here's what nobody tells you about changing your thought patterns, and this is the part where most people give up. When you first start consciously choosing your thoughts instead of letting them run on autopilot, you'll encounter massive internal resistance that feels like trying to swim upstream against a powerful current. And this resistance isn't weakness or lack of willpower. It's your subconscious mind fighting to maintain the familiar patterns it's been running for years or decades. Alan discovered that every thought you've ever had repeatedly has carved a neural pathway in your brain, like water carving a groove in stone, and the thoughts you've had most often have carved the deepest grooves, which means your habitual thoughts flow through those grooves automatically without any conscious effort. It's why you can worry about money without trying, criticize yourself without deciding to, or feel anxious about the future on autopilot. Your brain is designed for efficiency. It doesn't want to create new pathways when old ones already exist. So when you try to think a new thought that contradicts your habitual pattern, your subconscious literally pushes back, generates discomfort, creates doubt, makes the new thought feel fake or forced, tries everything possible to get you back into the familiar groove, even if that groove is creating misery. Most people interpret this resistance as evidence that the new thought isn't true, or that they're lying to themselves. So they quit and go back to their old mental patterns, never realizing that resistance is actually proof they're changing, proof they're carving a new pathway, proof the law of mental cause and effect is working. I experienced this resistance so intensely during my 90-day experiment that I almost gave up multiple times. Every morning I'd consciously plant abundance thoughts, and within an hour my subconscious would flood me with scarcity thoughts, usually triggered by something external like checking my bank account or seeing a bill or comparing myself to someone more successful on social media. My inner dialogue would say things like, "This is stupid. You're just pretending. Your real situation hasn't changed. You're still broke. This positive thinking garbage doesn't work in the real world. You're wasting your time. You should be doing something practical instead of playing mind games." And those thoughts felt so true, so real, so compelling that I believed them. I started to think maybe the law of mental cause and effect is just philosophy, not reality. Maybe circumstances really do control thoughts instead of thoughts controlling circumstances. Then I reread Alan's chapter on effect of thought on circumstances, and found this gem: a man's mind may be likened to a garden which may be intelligently cultivated, or allowed to run wild. But whether cultivated or neglected, it must and will bring forth, if no useful seeds are put into it, then an abundance of useless weed seeds will fall therein, and will continue to produce their kind. That's when I realized the resistance wasn't evidence that my new thoughts were fake. It was evidence that my old thoughts were weeds I'd been allowing to grow unchecked for years. And weeds don't just disappear because you plant flowers. You have to actively pull them out repeatedly until the flowers dominate. So I changed my strategy. Instead of just planting new abundance thoughts and hoping they'd override the scarcity thoughts, I started treating it like actual gardening. Every time a scarcity thought appeared, I would consciously acknowledge it, label it as a weed, and immediately uproot it by choosing a different thought. Not fighting it, not suppressing it, not pretending it wasn't there, but simply recognizing it as a weed and replacing it with a flower. Scarcity thought pops up saying you'll never have enough money. I'd notice it. Say that's a weed from the old garden, and immediately replace it with, I'm constantly creating value, and money flows to me. As a result, the new thought felt fake at first, like I was lying to myself. But I did it anyway, because Alan said the feeling follows the thinking, not the other way around. You don't wait to feel abundant before thinking abundant thoughts. You think abundant thoughts consistently until the feeling of abundance becomes automatic. After 21 days of this practice, something shifted. The resistance decreased. The new thoughts started to feel more natural. The old thoughts lost their power because I was starving them of attention while feeding the new ones. And by day 60, my default mental state had actually changed. I was having abundance thoughts automatically without effort. And scarcity thoughts were now the exception, not the rule. The neural pathway had been carved deep enough that water now flowed through it naturally. But here's the thing that shocked me most about the law of mental cause and effect. And Alan warned about this, but I didn't fully understand it until I experienced it. Your external circumstances are always reflecting your internal mental state from 30 to 90 days ago, not today, which means you're living in the past even though it feels like the present. And this creates a confusing situation where you've changed your thoughts, but your circumstances haven't changed yet, so you think the law isn't working. Alan called this the gestation period. Every mental seed has a different incubation time before it manifests as a physical circumstance. Small seeds, like a good parking spot or a free coffee, manifest quickly, sometimes within hours. Medium seeds, like a new job or relationship, manifest in weeks or months. Large seeds, like financial freedom or complete life transformation, manifest in months or years. And most people plant a seed on Monday, see no visible change by Friday, assume it didn't work. Dig up the seed, plant a different seed, repeat the cycle endlessly and never harvest anything. The law of mental cause and effect requires patience because effects lag behind causes. When you change your thoughts today, your circumstances don't instantly rearrange themselves. They continue reflecting your old thoughts for a while, like a delayed mirror. And during this gap between cause and effect is where most people lose faith and quit, not realizing they're days or weeks away from breakthrough. Understanding this time delay is absolutely critical, because without it, you'll abandon new thought patterns right before they manifest. You'll misinterpret the lag as failure when it's actually just gestation. During my 90-day experiment, I hit a wall around day 40, where I'd been consistently planting abundance thoughts for over a month. But my external circumstances looked exactly the same. Same job I hated, same broke bank account, same struggling situation, and my brain started screaming at me that this whole law of mental cause and effect thing is nonsense, that I'm wasting my time, that I should go back to being realistic and accept my limitations. I almost quit. I came so close to saying, forget this philosophical mumbo-jumbo. I need practical solutions, not mental gymnastics. But then I remembered something Alan wrote. Men are anxious to improve their circumstances, but are unwilling to improve themselves. They therefore remain bound. I realized I was doing exactly what he warned against. I was anxious for external improvement, but impatient with internal improvement. I wanted the harvest without the waiting period, the result without the process. And the law doesn't work that way. You can't shortcut gestation. So I made a decision. I'm going to maintain these new thought patterns for the full 90 days, no matter what my circumstances look like. I'm going to trust the invisible process even when I see no visible results. I'm going to act as if the law is working perfectly even when my mirror shows me my old reflection, because I understood that my current circumstances were showing me my thoughts from 30 to 60 days ago when I was still thinking scarcity, not my current thoughts of abundance. The shift happened on day 47. Completely unexpectedly, my boss called me into his office, and I thought I was getting fired. Instead, he offered me a project I'd never been considered for before, something I wasn't even qualified for on paper. And when I asked why me, he said, "I've noticed a change in your energy lately. You seem more confident, more positive, like you actually want to be here now." And that shocked me because I hadn't told anyone about my mental experiment. I hadn't changed anything about my external behavior consciously. All I'd changed were my internal thoughts. Yet somehow my energy shifted enough that others noticed, and opportunities I'd never had access to suddenly appeared. That was my first tangible proof that the law of mental cause and effect is real. That thoughts don't just stay in your head. They radiate outward, influence your presence, change how people perceive and respond to you, open doors that were previously invisible, and I hadn't changed my boss, my company, my circumstances. I'd only changed my mental garden. But that internal change created an external effect precisely according to the law Alan described. By day 90, my income had increased 40%. I'd been promoted, started a side business, met new people who became crucial connections, and most importantly, I felt completely different, confident instead of insecure, abundant instead of scarce, capable instead of limited. And when I looked back at my journal, I could see the exact correlation between specific thought pattern changes and specific circumstantial changes that followed 30 to 60 days later. It was mathematical, it was precise, it was law. But now you might be thinking, okay, I get it. Thoughts create circumstances. But what about things outside my control? What about the economy, other people's choices, random events, tragedy, illness, things I didn't think into existence? And this is where Alan's teaching gets really deep and honestly controversial. Here's the uncomfortable truth that James Allen taught and most modern manifestation gurus avoid. The law of mental cause and effect doesn't just apply to things you can directly control, it applies to everything in your life, including the things that seem completely random or outside your influence. Allen said that man is buffeted by circumstances so long as he believes himself to be the creature of outside conditions. But when he realizes that he is a creative power and that he may command the hidden soil and seeds of his being, out of which circumstances grow, he then becomes the rightful master of himself. This means even circumstances that appear external, random, or caused by other people are actually reflecting something in your mental state. Not because you consciously wished for them, but because your habitual thoughts create a vibration, an energy, a frequency that attracts matching circumstances like a magnet attracts iron filings. Most people find this idea offensive. They say, "You're telling me I attracted my car accident, my illness, my betrayal, my trauma. That's victim blaming. That's cruel." But Alan isn't saying you consciously wanted those things or that you're morally responsible for others' evil actions. He's saying your mental state creates a field of probability that makes certain experiences more or less likely. Like soil pH makes certain plants more or less likely to grow. Let me give you a specific example from my own life that's going to illustrate this in a way you can't deny. 5 years ago, I was in a relationship that ended in brutal betrayal. My partner cheated, lied, gaslighted me for months, and when it all came out, I felt like a complete victim. How could I have possibly attracted this? I didn't want to be cheated on. I didn't think thoughts of betrayal. This was clearly something done to me by someone else's choices. But when I studied Alan's work on mental cause and effect, and honestly examined my mental state during that relationship, I discovered something uncomfortable. I had been thinking thoughts of unworthiness, thoughts of not being enough, thoughts of expecting to be left, thoughts of fear that my partner would find someone better, thoughts of insecurity and jealousy and suspicion. I never thought I want to be betrayed, but I was thinking I'm not enough to keep them faithful. And according to the law, those thoughts created a vibration that attracted exactly the experience that matched the frequency. My partner made their own choices and is responsible for those choices, but my mental state created the soil where that type of relationship could grow. Someone confident and secure wouldn't have attracted that situation or would have ended it at the first red flag, instead of tolerating it for months out of fear of being alone. Alan explains this perfectly when he says, "Circumstances do not make the man, they reveal him to himself." Every external situation is showing you your internal state. It's a mirror reflecting your dominant thoughts back to you in physical form. And the moment you understand this, you stop being a victim and become a creator. You stop blaming circumstances and start changing thoughts. This doesn't mean bad things only happen to bad thinkers. It means everything that happens is lawful. It's effect following cause, and if you don't like the effects you're experiencing, you have the power to change the causes you're planting. I tested this after the betrayal. Instead of staying in victim mode blaming my ex, I took radical responsibility for my mental state. I asked what thoughts was I thinking that created the soil for this experience, and when I identified them, unworthiness, fear, insecurity, I started pulling those weeds and planting new seeds, self-worth, trust, security, and within 6 months, I attracted a completely different type of relationship with someone who treated me the way I'd started treating myself, mentally. The law worked. Circumstances changed when thoughts changed, and I went from attracting betrayal to attracting loyalty, not because I got lucky, but because I changed the mental cause that was creating the external effect. But here's where most people mess this up, and it's the biggest obstacle to using the law of mental cause and effect successfully. Most people think they can change their life by changing their thoughts occasionally. They'll do 10 minutes of affirmations in the morning, maybe visualize their goals during meditation, read a positive book before bed, and then spend the remaining 23 hours and 40 minutes thinking the same old thoughts they've always thought. And they genuinely believe those 20 minutes of conscious positive thinking should override the 1,420 minutes of unconscious negative thinking. Alan would call this delusional. He said, "It's not enough to occasionally think good thoughts. You must establish a new habitual thought pattern that becomes your default mental state, because the law of mental cause and effect responds to consistent dominant thinking, not occasional positive moments." Imagine trying to change the direction of a massive river by throwing a few buckets of water the opposite way. The river doesn't care about your few buckets. It flows in the direction of the overwhelming current. Same with your thoughts. A few positive thoughts can't redirect the overwhelming current of your habitual negative thoughts. You need to change the river itself, redirect the entire flow, and that requires vigilance, awareness, and consistent effort over weeks or months until the new direction becomes automatic. Here's what I discovered. When I started monitoring my thoughts obsessively, I was shocked by how much mental activity happens completely unconsciously. I'd catch myself mid-thought, realizing I'd been running a negative mental loop for 10 minutes without even noticing. Thoughts like this is never gonna work. I always fail. Nothing ever goes right for me. I'm not smart enough. I don't have what it takes. And these thoughts weren't dramatic emotional breakdowns. They were just quiet background noise. My brain was playing on repeat, like elevator music I'd stopped consciously hearing. Alan calls this the accumulation of thought force. Every time you think a thought, you're not just having that thought once. You're strengthening the pathway for that thought to return, making it more likely you'll think it again tomorrow and again the day after, until it becomes so automatic you don't even realize you're thinking it. The thoughts you've had most often in your life have become your mental default settings. They run in the background constantly, influencing your perception, decisions, energy, and behavior without your conscious awareness. And according to the law of mental cause and effect, these background thoughts are far more powerful than your occasional conscious thoughts because they're active 95% of the time, while your conscious thoughts are only active 5%. I realized I needed to become aware of my unconscious thought patterns if I wanted to change them. So I set alarms on my phone every 2 hours. When the alarm went off, I'd stop whatever I was doing and check what thought I'd been thinking in that moment. And for the first week, it was brutal. I caught myself thinking negative thoughts about 80% of the time. Complaining, worrying, doubting, resenting, fearing, criticizing myself and others, and these thoughts felt so normal, so true, so justified that I never questioned them. They were just how I saw reality. But Alan says, your thoughts don't show you reality. They create your reality. So if your habitual thoughts are negative, your reality must become negative because the law of mental cause and effect is making it so. You're the artist painting your life with the brush of your dominant thoughts and then stepping back and saying, I don't like this painting, without realizing you're the one holding the brush. Once I saw my unconscious thought patterns clearly, I couldn't unsee them. It was like waking up from a dream and realizing I'd been asleep at the wheel of my own mind for decades, letting my brain run wild with whatever thoughts it wanted to think, never consciously directing it, never choosing deliberately, just reacting and repeating old patterns on autopilot. That awareness was painful but necessary. Because you can't change what you're not aware of, the first step to using the law of mental cause and effect consciously is becoming conscious of the thoughts you're currently causing unconsciously. But even when you become aware of your thoughts, there's another huge obstacle most people don't anticipate. You can repeat positive affirmations all day long, but if you don't emotionally believe them, they won't manifest. And this is where most people get stuck. They're trying to change their circumstances by changing their words, while their underlying beliefs remain unchanged. Alan understood this deeply. He said, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he, not as a man thinks in his head, or as a man speaks with his mouth, but in his heart. Meaning the subconscious emotional belief system is what actually drives manifestation, not the conscious intellectual thoughts. You can say, I am wealthy 1,000 times, but if your heart, your gut, your subconscious doesn't believe it, if there's a deeper part of you that knows you're lying, that affirmation is just noise. It has no creative power because there's no emotional conviction behind it. The law of mental cause and effect requires thought plus feeling. The thought is the seed, but the feeling is the water that makes it grow. Thoughts without emotional belief are sterile. They can't germinate, they just sit there in your conscious mind while your subconscious continues running the old programs it actually believes. I experienced this frustration constantly during my first attempts at conscious manifestation. I'd affirm abundance while feeling broke. I'd visualize success while feeling like a failure. I'd declare confidence while feeling terrified. And nothing changed because I was planting seeds in dry soil. The thoughts had no emotional water to activate them. Alan says this is why people can read all the books, attend all the seminars, learn all the techniques, and still not change their lives. They're working at the surface level of conscious thought, while the real power lies in the subconscious level of emotional belief. And the subconscious doesn't respond to what you say. It responds to what you feel, what you truly believe deep down beneath the affirmations and positive thinking. So how do you change subconscious beliefs? How do you get your heart to believe what your head is trying to think? And this is where Alan's teaching becomes incredibly practical. He says, you must act as if the thing you desire is already true. You must live from the end. You must embody the mental state of the person who already has what you want. not as pretending, not as faking it, but as genuine assumption of the new identity. Here's exactly how I did this, and it changed everything. Instead of trying to believe I was abundant while feeling broke, I started asking, what would I be thinking and feeling if I already had the abundance I'm seeking? How would an abundant person think about money, react to bills, respond to opportunities, treat themselves and others? And I started practicing those thoughts and feelings regardless of my current circumstances. An abundant person doesn't stress about a bill. They handle it calmly, knowing more money is always coming. So I started handling bills that way even when my bank account was low. An abundant person doesn't resent others' success. They celebrate it, knowing there's plenty for everyone. So I started genuinely celebrating when friends succeeded even when I was struggling. An abundant person invests in themselves, buys quality things, tips generously, gives freely, so I started doing those things in small ways I could afford, not recklessly, but as practice for the abundant identity I was assuming. Within weeks, my emotional state shifted. I started genuinely feeling abundant, even though my circumstances hadn't fully changed yet. And that feeling was the water that activated the abundance seeds I'd been planting. Suddenly, the law of mental cause and effect had both elements it needed. Thought plus feeling, seed plus water, and manifestation accelerated dramatically. But there's one more critical piece to this law that Alan revealed. And without it, you'll keep self-sabotaging even when you're doing everything else right. The law of mental cause and effect demands consistency over time. You can't plant abundance seeds for a week, scarcity seeds the next week, back to abundance the week after, and expect anything coherent to grow. Yet most people's mental gardens look exactly like this: chaotic, contradictory, inconsistent. Alan said that achievement of any kind is the crown of effort, the diadem of thought, and he meant that real results come from sustained, consistent thinking in one direction over weeks and months, not scattered occasional positive thoughts mixed with constant negative ones. Your mind is like a radio transmitter. It's always broadcasting a signal, and the universe, or quantum field, or whatever you want to call the creative medium, responds to the dominant, consistent signal you're sending, not the occasional spikes. If your signal is abundance for 10 minutes a day and scarcity for the other 23 hours and 50 minutes, guess which reality you'll create? The law is mathematical. It gives you more of what you predominantly focus on. And most people are predominantly focused on what they don't want, while occasionally thinking about what they do want, then wondering why they keep getting what they don't want. I discovered my own inconsistency when I started tracking my thought patterns across an entire month. I'd have 3 or 4 really good days where I maintained positive thoughts, felt abundant, stayed in a high vibration, and I'd think I've figured it out. I've mastered this law. Then something would trigger me, a bill, a comparison, a setback, and I'd spiral into negative thinking for 2 or 3 days, completely undoing the progress I'd made. It was like building a sandcastle and then kicking it over, building it again, kicking it over again. I was sabotaging myself with inconsistency. And according to Alan, the law can't respond to that kind of scattered energy. It needs a clear, consistent signal to produce a clear, consistent result. He wrote, "You will become as small as your controlling desire, as great as your dominant aspiration. And the key word is dominant, not occasional, not hopeful, not wishful, but dominant. The thought pattern that dominates your mental space most of the time is what determines your reality." Most people's dominant thought pattern is worry, doubt, fear, lack, and resentment, with occasional moments of hope, gratitude, and positivity. So their reality reflects the dominant pattern, not the occasional moments. The breakthrough for me came when I stopped trying to be perfect and started aiming for consistency. I accepted that I'd have bad days, negative thoughts would arise, triggers would happen, but I made a commitment that even on bad days I wouldn't stay there. I'd notice the negative spiral, acknowledge it, and consciously redirect back to my chosen thought pattern within a few hours instead of a few days. I created a practice I called the 2-hour reset. Every 2 hours I'd check my mental state. If I drifted into negativity, I wouldn't beat myself up about it. I'd just reset, choose a better thought, and keep going. And over time, this practice trained my mind to spend more hours per day in positive thought than negative thought. The ratio shifted from 20-80 to 50-50 to eventually 80-20. And as that ratio shifted, my external reality shifted proportionally. More consistent abundance thinking produced more consistent abundance circumstances. Alan promises this. He says that into your hands will be placed the exact results of your own thoughts. You will receive that which you earn. No more, no less. And he's not talking about occasional thinking. He's talking about the mental habits you've established through consistent repetition over time. Those habits are carving your destiny right now, whether you're aware of it or not. But here's the part that absolutely transformed how I use this law. And it's something Alan taught that modern manifestation completely misses. Most people are passive thinkers. They let thoughts happen to them like weather. They don't choose thoughts. Thoughts just appear, and they go along for the ride, reacting to whatever their brain presents. And Alan says this is why most people are slaves to circumstance instead of masters of circumstance. He discovered there's a massive difference between passive thinking and active thinking. Passive thinking is unconscious, reactive, habitual. It's whatever thought your brain defaults to based on past conditioning. Active thinking is conscious, deliberate, chosen. It's selecting specific thoughts intentionally, regardless of what your brain defaults to. The law of mental cause and effect works with both types of thinking, but passive thinking creates your life on autopilot based on old programming, while active thinking allows you to consciously design your life based on chosen programming. And most people never make the shift from passive to active. They go their entire lives as passengers in their own minds instead of drivers. Here's how I learned the difference experientially. I started an exercise where for 1 hour every morning I would practice active thinking. I'd sit with a journal and deliberately choose what to think about. I'd select a topic like abundance or health or relationships, and I'd consciously direct my thoughts in that direction, building the mental picture I wanted, generating the feelings aligned with it, not letting my mind wander to worry or doubt or distraction, just pure, focused, chosen. Thought for 60 minutes. At first it was exhausting. My brain fought me constantly. It wanted to drift back to familiar worry patterns. It would throw distractions at me, make me feel restless, tell me this is a waste of time. But I persisted, and what I discovered was shocking. I realized that 99% of my thinking, up to that point, had been passive. I'd been letting my brain think whatever it wanted to think, following whatever neural pathway was most carved, and those pathways were all negative because that's what I'd practiced for years. Active thinking felt unnatural at first because it was new. I was creating new pathways, going against the current. But Alan says, this is exactly how you change your mental garden. You must actively plant what you want, instead of passively allowing what grows on its own. After 30 days of 1 hour daily active thinking practice, something incredible happened. My passive thinking started to change. The thoughts that appeared automatically when I wasn't consciously directing them began to shift toward more positive patterns. It was like the active practice was reprogramming my subconscious defaults, creating new grooves that water could flow through even when I wasn't paying attention. Alan explains this as the accumulation of thought force. Every active thought you think with intention doesn't just have an immediate effect. It strengthens the pattern for that thought to arise passively in the future. You're training your brain what to think automatically, and if you train it with active abundance. Thinking, eventually, passive abundance thinking becomes your new default. By day 90, I barely needed to practice active thinking anymore. Because my passive thinking had transformed, I was automatically thinking positive thoughts without effort. My brain's default setting had changed from scarcity to abundance, from fear to trust, from doubt to certainty. And this shift created a permanent change in my external circumstances because I wasn't just occasionally manifesting, I was consistently manifesting. The law of mental cause and effect was working in my favor 24 hours a day instead of just during my morning practice. But even with all this understanding and practice, there's one final element that determines whether you'll actually use this law successfully or fail like most people do. The hardest part of working with the law of mental cause and effect is the gap between planting the seed and seeing the harvest, what Alan calls the time of waiting. And this gap will test your faith like nothing else because you're being asked to maintain new thoughts before seeing new circumstances, to believe before receiving, to assume success while still experiencing struggle. Most people fail this test. They plant abundant seeds, wait a week or two, see no change, decide it's not working, go back to old thoughts, and never give the law enough time to produce results. They're like a farmer who plants corn, checks the field every day, sees no corn, digs up the seeds to examine them, replants them somewhere else, repeats this cycle, and then blames the seeds for not growing. Alan says the universe is testing your commitment to your new mental state, asking, are you serious about this, or are you just experimenting? Will you hold this thought pattern long enough for it to manifest, or will you abandon it at the first sign of delay? And most people abandon it. They want instant manifestation. They can't tolerate the void between cause and effect, so they never harvest anything. I faced this test brutally during my 90-day experiment. There was a period from day 30 to day 47 where I'd been consistently planting abundance thoughts, doing all the practices, maintaining active thinking, embodying the feeling of already having what I wanted. And my external circumstances looked exactly the same. No improvement, no change, no sign that anything was working. My logical brain started screaming at me that I was delusional, that I was wasting my time with mental gymnastics while real life required real action, that the law of mental cause and effect might work for other people but clearly didn't work for me, and I came so close to quitting, to saying this is all nonsense. I need to face reality and stop playing these mind games. But something Alan wrote stopped me. He said, dream lofty dreams, and as you dream, so shall you become. Your vision is the promise of what you shall one day be. Your ideal is the prophecy of what you shall at last unveil. I realized the test wasn't whether the law works. The law is impersonal and always works. The test was whether I would hold my vision long enough for it to manifest. Whether I trusted the process more than I trusted my current circumstances. Whether I believed in the invisible seed more than the visible dirt. So I made a decision that changed everything. I'm going to maintain these abundance thoughts for the full 90 days. Regardless of what happens externally, I'm not checking my circumstances every day to validate whether it's working. I'm just going to assume it's working and let the law do its job in its own timing. I'm going to act as if the harvest is guaranteed, even though I can't see it yet. And that decision, that absolute commitment to the mental cause, regardless of the physical effect, was the turning point. Within days of making that commitment, opportunities started appearing. Not because the law suddenly started working. It had been working all along. But because I stopped interfering with doubt and impatience, I got out of the way and let the law complete its process. Alan teaches this perfectly when he says, calmness of mind is one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom. It comes from long and patient effort in self-control. And he means you must control your need for immediate results, your impatience, your doubt during the gap, because that gap is where the law is actively working underground, preparing the soil, growing the roots, developing the manifestation, and if you disrupt it with doubt, you kill the process. The people who successfully use the law of mental cause and effect to transform their lives aren't smarter or more talented or luckier than those who fail. They're simply more patient, more committed, more willing to hold the vision during the void. And that patience is rewarded because the law is absolutely reliable. It will deliver results when the gestation period is complete. The question is, will you still be there when it does? Now you have the complete framework for understanding and applying James Allen's law of mental cause and effect. You know that thoughts are causes and circumstances are effects. You know there's a time delay between planting a mental seed and harvesting a physical result. You know the difference between passive unconscious thinking and active deliberate thinking. You know that consistency over time is what carves new neural pathways and creates permanent change. You know that emotional belief is what activates thought seeds and makes them grow. You know that the gap between cause and effect will test your faith and most people quit right before breakthrough. And you know that you're not a victim of circumstances. You're the creator of circumstances through the mental habits you've established over years of repetitive thinking. The question now isn't whether this law is real. The law is real whether you believe it or not. It's been operating in your life since birth, creating effects from your causes automatically. The question is, will you use it consciously or unconsciously? Will you take control of your mental garden or continue letting weeds grow wild? Will you plant seeds deliberately or accidentally? Will you commit to a new thought pattern long enough to see it manifest? Or will you quit when you don't see instant results? I'm asking you right now to make a decision. Choose one area of your life you want to transform. Financial abundance, physical health, loving relationships, career success, inner peace, whatever matters most to you. And commit to 90 days of conscious mental planting in that area. 90 days where you actively choose thoughts aligned with what you want, instead of passively thinking thoughts aligned with what you currently have. 90 days where you embody the feeling of already having achieved it, instead of feeling the lack of not having it yet. 90 days where you maintain the vision during the void, and don't check your circumstances obsessively to validate if it's working. Track your thoughts. Notice your defaults. Catch yourself when you drift into old patterns. Redirect consciously. Be patient with the gestation period. Trust the law even when you can't see results yet. And I promise you, if you do this consistently for 90 days, your external circumstances must change, because the law of mental cause and effect is impersonal, mathematical, and absolutely reliable. It doesn't play favorites. It doesn't require you to be special or lucky or talented. It only requires you to plant the right seeds and tend them properly, and harvest is guaranteed. Subscribe to this channel right now if you want more deep content on James Allen, Neville Goddard, Florence Scovel Shinn, and the timeless principles of conscious creation that actually work. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next video where I reveal Allen's teaching on the power of purpose and how a definiteness of aim accelerates manifestation by focusing all your mental energy in one direction instead of scattering it in multiple directions. Comment below and tell me specifically which mental seed you're planting today. Be exact. Say, I'm planting the seed of financial abundance, or I'm planting the seed of perfect health, or I'm planting the seed of a loving relationship. Write it down publicly so you have accountability, and I'll respond to every single comment with encouragement and guidance. This is your life. You're the gardener. Your mind is the soil. Your thoughts are the seeds. What you plant today, you'll harvest in 30 to 90 days. So plant wisely, tend consistently, and trust the law. Because Allen was right. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. You become what you predominantly think about. Your outer world is always reflecting your inner world. Change the inner. The outer must follow. It's law. It's certain. It's yours to use starting right now. And I can't wait to hear your success stories 90 days from today. When the seeds you plant after watching this video break through the soil and produce the harvest you've been waiting for your entire life. The law of mental cause and effect is working for you or against you every single day. Make it work for you. Start now and watch what happens.